Shall I continue? Hello, can you hear me? Okay. I said liberalism offered me an ethically responsible order of human progress without necessarily involving the state. It is quite remarkable how liberalism, an idea born in 18th century Europe, went on to become the reigning ideology of the world. For over 2 centuries, liberal democracies and free markets spread around the world to become the only sensible way to organize public life. So, by the way, can you hear me? If you can hear me, raise your hand. All right, good. At least I know I'm not talking to the wind. Uh, so, the next thing I can tell you about is how I became a classical liberal. I worked for a company that made Vicks Vapor Rub. You've all, I'm sure, grown up as children with your mothers rubbing Vicks Vapor Rub when you were a baby. Anyway, one year there was a flu, and my company sold a lot of Vicks Vapor Rub. At the end of the year, we thought we had done a lot of good during an epidemic. We had helped millions of families in the country. But just as we were celebrating at the end of the year, I received a summons from the government which said that we had broken the law. And what was this law? It was a law of licensing, that we had sold more VIX than was provided for in our license. We had sold 30% more. And so I was summoned to Delhi. My lawyers told me that there was a 2-year jail sentence associated with breaking this law. And so I was scared. And so I arrived in Delhi. The joint secretary um kept me waiting for 2 hours. And then I was led into his office, and he was reading the newspaper, the Times of India of that day. And while I sat down, is there a problem? Yeah. So, the, sorry, I keep getting interrupted. But anyway, um, the we sat down. I was with a lawyer, and we waited for him to stop reading the paper. And after 5 minutes, he put the paper down and he looked at us and he said, "Kya?" And I said, "Saab, aap bataiye kya? Aapne hame bulaya hai." So he said, "No, no, you tell me, what's the problem?" And so I showed him the summons, and he said, "Oh, so you've broken the law." And I explained to him that there was a flu, and we did our duty. We kept the chemist shops stocked, the pharmacies stocked with our products, and I thought we had done good in the country when, and millions of people, especially children and families, were helped during this epidemic. And he answers, "But you broke the law." And I said, "Yes, but." He said, "No, but. You tell me yes or no." I said, "Yes." And then he said, "Well, you know, I think he must have been a Marxist also, because he said, you chaps in the private sector are all crooks. And frankly, I want to make an example of our company, of your company. Uh, You multinational companies think you're above the law. You come to our country thinking we are a poor country and you can get away with whatever. And and then he says, "Jao," and he threw us out of his office. And just as I was leaving this office, I turned around. I didn't know what got into me, but I said to him, "Sir, you realize that this news will come out and we won't have to leak it. It's not every day that an executive of a multinational company goes to jail in anywhere in the world. And since we are an American multinational, it'll appear in the New York Times, in London Times, the Washington Post, and so on." And I said, when people read the report, what will they think about our country? What will they think that here was a company that was actually helping the people, and you sent the executive of that company to jail? And he said, "Are you threatening me?" I said, "No, I'm just telling you this is what will be." Acha, he said, "Jao." And so I walked out. And after I came out, the lawyer said to me, "My God, you should have fallen on his feet and begged for mercy. And look at you telling him that what will the country think? What will the world think of India?" Anyway, I had a lot of sleepless nights, but fortunately, the government, in its wisdom, dropped the case quietly. And but the following week, I joined the Swatantra Party. I became a liberal. I had been, I'd been a socialist like everybody else at that time, and I went on to become a classical liberal. Now, there is a difference between uh, liberals, and you probably know that as well as I do. One, classical liberal, basically, as I pointed out in the very beginning, is a person who believes in freedom and believes in freedom, both economic freedom, religious freedom, political freedom of all kinds. Now, but there's a difference between a left liberal and a liberal. You know, it, about the in the 1920s, soon when there was there were these progressives, and when uh, in the 1929 market crash and there was a depression in the world, uh, there was a very real concern about the future of capitalism and markets. And President Roosevelt stepped in, and they tried to save capitalism by creating jobs because people were unemployed in a big way. Anyway, those people who came from the left and are and who still believe in markets, the socialists, at least at that time, the communists particularly did not believe in the markets. But so the left liberals are different, and that I think you know. The libertarians also are a form of liberals, and they are at the other extreme, meaning they believe in a night watchman state, a chowkidar state, which means basically law and order is the role of the government. Now, a classical liberal, then of course there was neoliberals, and neoliberals came about after Hayek and so on. And they basically returned, the welfare state, by the way, continued after Roosevelt right up to the 1990s. But governments soon realized that they were bankrupt. They couldn't afford the sort of government spending on welfare. And the neoliberals came in at that time. Anyway, I don't want to, there's time is short. So I just want to say that as a classical liberal in India today, I do believe in the role of the government beyond law and order. And I do believe that, for example, the government has a duty to ensure that there is education and health for everybody. It doesn't mean the government has to run schools and hospitals. It just means the government has to ensure, provide for it, create the incentive system for these things to come up. And I also believe in a safety net for the poorest. So that's defining who I am, but there are, it's like a spectrum. And that's why the word liberal is a slippery word and needs defining each time. Now, I was asked to quickly speak to you about where we are today and what needs to be done and where is the liberalism today. Uh, so the story really begins in 1991 because before 1991, we did not. I mean, in 1947, we got our political liberty, but we got our economic liberty only 40 years later. And frankly, um, we sacrificed two generations of uh, people uh, in terms of job opportunities that the we were a command economy essentially following the Soviet model. And Rajaji called this the license permit inspector Raj. Anyway, the economy, we got our economic freedom in 1991. And so what has happened after 1991? Well, in these uh, 30 years, India has grown at almost 6.5% a year, whereas in before 91, we had grown at 3.5% a year. We have lifted 450 million people out of poverty. Uh, the middle class has grown from 10% to 30%. Now, this is not as good as China. China lifted 600 million out of poverty, and its middle class has gone to 60%. And but we have also created an IT revolution, and we are a player in the global economy in the IT world. So we, as a democracy, to grow at 6.5% is damn good, and we should be proud of that. But there is one big failing, and that is that we have not created enough jobs that should be have been created with 6.5% growth. Um, and why? Why? Because we have not created an industrial revolution. Manufacturing has let us down. Um, Half our people, 45% of Indians are engaged in agriculture. And when agriculture needs only one third of those people. So imagine that these are the people, half of those people, these are the people in China who became middle class. And so we have a real unfinished agenda for our country. And where we stand today is the need to get manufacturing going in the country. Manufacturing today employs less than 11% of the people, represents less than 15% of GDP. And the export of manufactured goods from India is 2% of world exports of manufacturing products. That's the, that's the significance of our failure. Now, how we do it is the big question. Uh, and frankly, I think it can be done. We are in a far better position today than in 1991. We have had a digital revolution. We have created one country through the GST. Uh, and it's taken a lot of the friction out of the logistics in the country. Lot, infrastructure is far better. Road mileage has doubled from 2011 to now. Port handling capacity has quadrupled. And the key thing today, I mean, today the best news is that iPhone production has shown the way. iPhones, India makes about 20% of the world's iPhones. China produced, used to, 2 years ago, China produced 100%. China still produces 80%. And this is going to keep rising. And with the 15% last year that we did, 15% created 150,000 jobs in Chennai. And this was 70% of these jobs were women. And they came from villages, these women, to work. And frankly, each job created 4 indirect jobs. So 6 lakh jobs were created just through 15%. So now we're about 22%. And probably this is going to rise because of the tariffs game that Mr. Trump is playing in the world. And so what I would say is today, what needs to be done, first of all, and it's India's already real, I mean, the people in power realize this. And today, Mr. Trump is our best friend because India's problem has been export pessimism. Right from Nehru's days, we have suffered from export pessimism. And even today, Trump calls us the tariff king of the world. Now, that's not a compliment. That's an insult. It shows that we are not connected with the global value chains, which produce most of the exports in the world. And and that if once we so Trump is forcing us to lower our tariffs. And what we could not do ourselves, he's going to force us to do. And this will make us more competitive, more open to investments like the kind that Apple has done. And today, what Apple has shown is that, when the Prime Minister of Vietnam heard that Vietnam, by the way, Vietnam produces all the cell phones of Samsung. And Vietnam is a far more hospitable country for foreign investors than India. We are basically a hostile country. We talk about wanting investment, but we are a hostile country. There's too much license ride still going on at the bottom, etc. So I'll talk about the other reforms we still need to do. But my point is, the Prime Minister of Vietnam goes to Cupertino, California. He takes a flight. That's where the headquarters of Apple is. He convinces the Apple CEO. He says, "We have lost the phone to India. Will you give us the tablet?" And he gets the tablet. This is the way to behave. This is how Tamil Nadu is behaving, and Tamil Nadu is getting the investment. And so India, the chief minister of any state, with his delegation of people, should go to Nike, to Zara, to all the big consumer brands, which are labor intensive manufacturers, and convince the CEOs to manufacture in India. It can be done, and we will be competitive. We still need to do labor reform, we still need to do land acquisition reform, some other reforms. But this is the way to go. Anyway, so now this is one thing we need to do. As liberals, though, there's another problem. And I'm frankly convinced today, before I talk about the other problem, I'm convinced that our focus should be single-mindedly on single-mindedly on getting 7 to 8% growth. If we're going to reach Viksit Bharat goal, we can't do it without achieving this. And if we do this, if we do a 6-7% growth for the next 25 years, majority of India will be middle class, like China. And then we can say we are a developed country. So economically, that's the job that needs to be done, but it has to be pursued. It should be our political objective. It should be our military objective. It should be our foreign policy objective. It should be all of our objective should be 7% economic growth for 25 years. Keep opening the economy, keep getting the government out of the way, becoming an export competitive economy. Okay, so in addition to this, we still need to do governance reforms. Now, I wrote a book called India Grows at Night. And originally, the title was India Grows at Night when the government sleeps. Now, I wasn't just selling, by the way, the publishers dropped the last part of it because they thought it was too insulting to the government. But anyway, the book talks about the need for governance reforms. Why should it take 15 years to get justice in our courts? Why should it take 15 years to settle a contract between two parties who are arguing? Um, so this we won't become a developed country unless we do these reforms. We have to do police reforms, judicial reforms, parliament reform. 1 out of 3 persons in parliament has got a has got a crime registered against him or her. So we can't have criminals in politics like that. And there's an answer for all these things. And the answers have been given in the various reports over the years. And, Margaret Thatcher used to say, Margaret Thatcher is famous for doing economic reform, but she actually reformed governance of England. That should be our motto. And also the reform of the bureaucracy. China changed the incentive system of its lower bureaucracy when Deng Xiaoping came to power and did the reforms. So the bureaucracy was measured on the investment that came, on the jobs that were created. That's how it was measured. Whereas in India, you get measured by how many people you refuse. You're a hero. I refused permission to this company. I mean, the attitude of the bureaucracy needs to be changed. Okay, and before I leave you, there's still one big problem, and that is that before 1991, India was, we thought we were regarded by the world as a real, true liberal democracy. Today, there's a danger of our becoming an illiberal democracy. And so there's a political issue. Um, and this has been brought about by this present government, which has curbed dissent. And I have recounted the whole story in this book, The Dilemma of the Indian Liberal. And I would just say that we are worldwide with Mr. Trump and the other. The world is turning nationalistic, and we have to return back to the old liberal society. And the answer, I mean, I would not give up because I believe liberalism is too good an idea, and it's that's why it's been the reigning ideology of the world for 250 years. The world's not going to give up so easily. Yes, we are turning nationalistic, and the global economy is being forgotten, and there are reasons for it. But and in India particularly, I believe the temper of Indians is a liberal temper. You know, when you have 330 million gods, no god can afford to feel jealous. That's the heart of our liberalism, our pluralism. And even in the Rig Veda, you know, that famous Nasadiya verse in chapter 10, where they're talking about how was the cosmos created, how was the universe created. They they're searching, and so one side says, well, maybe we should ask the gods, and the other person says, no, no, the gods came afterwards. How will they know? And then they say, let's ask the Brahmins. And no, no, they're always arguing with each other. We'll just get confused. And ultimately, they keep going back and forth and they decide, well, maybe we don't know how the world was created. And that is a skeptical thought. And skepticism, inquiry is at the root of the liberal temper of our country. And the liberal temper later went on to express itself in the Upanishads, in the searching and the questioning of the Upanishads. And so I believe, and that's why we are, I mean, Amartya Sen wrote that wonderful book called The Argumentative Indian. We are an argumentative people. And that's the heart. So India is not going to cave in to becoming a dictatorship the way China did. In India, um, the state was never as powerful as society. And so, but that's another story. So that's my end of my little talk for you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to to speak to you. And so maybe we'll meet one day soon. Uh, and let me wish you goodbye.
No, can everybody hear? Okay. Yes, I don't have the mic. Okay, all the mics are up. Okay, welcome everyone to the second Libertarian Summit. Good to see a lot of familiar faces here. Yeah. I actually had prepared a pretty long speech on the 91 liberation thing, but Luchandras has already spoken about it. So I'll talk about something a little bit tangential. First of all, I just want to do a quick poll from here. Like, how many of you here identify as classical liberal? Okay, one. Okay, minority report. Okay, okay, couple here. Okay, okay, libertarians. Okay, great. More libertarians. Anarcho-capitalists. Anarcho-capitalists in the house. Yes. Okay. So, except for the anarcho-capitalists, all of you are socialists. Okay. So, yeah. Do most of you agree that taxation is fair? Anybody who doesn't think that taxation is fair? Okay, great. Because we had prepared a gulag in the next room, so we'll not have to send you guys there. So, see, looking at the audience, most of the people here are younger. Probably most of them born after 91, or even some of us who are older. We've only lived a very small period of time before 91. So, India after independence was a very weird sort of a place to be in to do business in, because everybody believed that the state had to provide everything and private sector was basically demonized. And that changed a little bit after 91. We were forced to. I mean, it was not that there was a growing shift in public opinion that people suddenly realized that, this statism isn't working. We ran out of money and the restrictions were imposed on us by IMF. And we sort of fell in. And we've seen how the economy has actually grown since then. And after 91, even till date, a lot of people don't really realize how much of a difference the reforms have actually made. A common socialist thing is, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, which is absolutely not based in any reality. Because we have lifted probably, I don't know, more than 270 million people out of poverty after 91. And if you look at the amount of poverty elevation that has happened in the past 50 years, it is actually very little. And the economy was growing very little. If the economy doesn't grow, no matter what sort of an extractive policy the government uses, there isn't going to be money to spend if, first of all, the economy is not generating money. It is unfortunate that, the whole thing was called the Hindu rate of growth, which is sort of sad because, in Indian civilization, we've had very prosperous era. We were at one point of time one of the highest GDPs on the planet, and we had a relatively free trade policies, largely because I think the state didn't have the ability to control trade to so much extent. And then it had to finance anything. It had to finance, be it war, be it paid soldiers. It had to be born out of the money generated. So sort of calling it a Hindu rate of growth is actually a little bit sad, but that's the reality. We went through a very low period of growth for a very long time. Post 91, the upward trajectory has been huge. But what is the problem? Do the sources have a point to always be complaining? I mean, that's the sources thing to do, to complain. But do they have, is there a point there? Uh, are the rich getting richer? Yes, they are getting richer. Is that a problem? Depends. So normally in a free market, some people are more successful than the others. I mean, somebody comes up, like you have a company like Google that's generating a lot of value in the market. People go use the products, they make money. Nothing wrong in that. But is India a free market? Like, have we really become free after 91? I don't think so. We eliminated some sort of a license Raj, but I think the structure has slightly changed. We are still a very much a license permit Raj. Uh, though it isn't, the state doesn't control everything to the extent that it once did. But now it is just a bunch of crony capitalists that that control a lot of the economy, and most of the policies are actually tailored to suit their interests. Before I'm growing up, like anytime we had to talk about some amount of somebody rich, it always used to be Tata and Birla. And now I think we have a couple new names. Now it's Ambani and Adani. So what has happened after 91? Like, did did India become a lot more freer to some extent? But the crony capitalism has actually increased significantly. Uh, I mean, as the economy is growing, there are greater avenues for these corporations to exploit. And a lot of times when libertarians talk about these issues, immediately people say, like, "You talking like socialist, why are you always complaining about it?" A lot of people don't realize that libertarians are pro-market. We aren't pro-business. So we don't believe that it's the government job to make sure that some corporation becomes richer. Or at the same time, we are not saying that the money should be taken by a corporation in the form of taxes for the purposes of redistribution to somebody else. So we want the markets to have a greater role in making sure that everybody grows. And generally, the freer the market is, the more prosperous the people are. So I was just yesterday. I mean, I just got here yesterday and taken the flight, land in the airport. And of course, it's an Adani airport, and we know. See, when a company is big, somebody like Adani, Ambani, or Billabong, they have a lot of access to capital, and that's not a problem per se. The problem is when the guidelines are actually changed to allow them access. So the government in 2019 decided that you no longer needed any sort of an experience to run airports. Fair enough, sounds good. But there is sort of a pattern here that whenever a company like Adani or an Ambani or a Tata or a Birla wants something, suddenly the rules are tweaked. Now today you try going and applying for some government product contract, be it a road, be it some other tender, anything, doesn't matter. They will always insist that you have a certain amount of experience, that you have a certain amount of turnover, a lot of very arbitrary criteria. Today, the whole optioning and the tender system is pretty much a joke. You might actually think that an auction is great because everybody can bid for the best price, but the auction norms are so rigged up that the government first of all decides already that these are the corporate groups that we want them to win, and the norms are tailored in such a way. So in 2019, the government said you don't need any experience, and immediately Adani Group got control of 6 airports. And let's talk about the Bombay airport. The Bombay airport was not one that they got in that initial lot. Adani wanted the Bombay airport, which was run by the GVK. And what happened immediately? They got a lot of raids from the ED. They had a lot of problem with taxes and everything. And the official narrative is that GVK group had issues with the debt and therefore gave up the airport to Adani. But you see how it is happening. The government does sort of ED raids, put some sort of pressure, and then the transfer happens to another group. It looks very suspicious. And okay, then just landing through the airport, you see, Bombay is full of slums. Okay, Bombay's largest slum, Darwin, going for a redevelopment project. Again, who's getting it? Adani. And he wasn't the guy who actually won the original tender. It was some other company, probably another proxy of some politicians. But their tender was cancelled on procedural norms. New norms given. Again, in the norms of the tender, it is mentioned that no previous experience required. Fantastic. I mean, it almost feels like government opening up everything, but it's only just opening up to specific firms. Adani won it. Uh, so everywhere you look at the ports, big coal blocks. There are few large industrial groups that benefit out of it, and you have to blame the Indian capitalist corporations for it, also partially, because they are the ones who are always pushing forward these sort of policies to favor themselves. We don't really have principled capitalists in India, and that affects the whole debate also. So it is hard also for us when social comes and say, oh, you guys are just about corporates looting people. And yes, definitely a lot of government policies are effectively wealth transfer to the common people from the poor to these corporations. And how do we fix that? We need to restrict government power. We need to free up the markets. People think right now because you're privatizing everything. This is definitely a shift towards a free market. But how you do privatization is more important than just doing privatization. If privatization just means you have your government bank lend money to Adani so he can take it up, that's not real privatization. You're just saying literally when these socialists, the communists, and all this say, Modi is selling the country, and as the libertarians, we say, what selling? He's really not selling the country. We want more privatization. There's been very little privatization that's happened under the government. Air India, a couple of examples. But what is happening is shifting of a lot of assets from the government, what's under government control or scattered around, they're being consolidated and being pushed to. I mean, could be Ambani, Adani, it's not like Tata's Villas. There are a lot of industrial groups that are gaining it. Some are actually gaining a lot more things. So this is a privatization. When Adani wants to acquire a coal mine in Australia, the government banks are funding it. Now, if you are a normal entrepreneur who goes to a bank and tries to get a loan, they'll require all sorts of norms. But government banks are basically used by the political class to dispense loans to business people. I mean, if you look at the Vijay Mallya case, like back then, there was a point of time when he approached IDBI bank for a loan, and it was sanctioned to him in a period of days. And on the day the bank sanctioned the loan was the day on which the account was actually active. So normally if you go, they'll ask you for like prior history, your banking records, nothing. And you know what eventually happened. A lot of cycling happened. He ran away from the country, and it's not this every large corporate group benefited from public sector banks, and they are totally influenced by the political class. So you need to fix that if we want to have actually proper privatization. And also the electricity deals. Recently, we've been opposing a certain deal that again happened. I mean, it almost looks like this is a rant against Adani. It is just no. It is that I just landed. I'm just seeing things everywhere. We are seeing in the state of Andhra Pradesh. There was almost like a huge, like 7,000 megawatt deal that was struck with the Adani, the green energy company, and 97% of the contracts was given to Adani, and 3% was given to another company. Subsequently, a couple of a year and a half later, that 3% was also transferred back to Adani. And the government regulator actually said that we don't really need solar power in the short term. We don't need it. We need energy sources that are available 24/7, and they also recommended that the price is actually too high. 24 hours. The deal was approved in 24 hours. If you apply for the registration of a company to the MCA side, just to tell you whether or not a certain name is available, it takes you 3 days. But Adani went to the YSRCP government in Andhra Pradesh, 24 hours, he got 57 days, the entire deal was signed. Of course, the US gave out a report said that close to some 200 million or something of bribe money was paid. But you're looking at states bending over backward to transfer public money to these private companies. And what's happening is the rate of electricity per unit, the price that was finally signed with the government is much higher than what the regulator said the price would be at the time Adani would start supplying energy. But again, and they signed up a 25-year old 5-year lock-in period, which I mean, this is not something we are saying, this is something the Andhra Pradesh government and when Chandrababu Naidu, the opposing party, when Jagan was there, he said it's going to cost the taxpayer, I think, 80,000 crores over a period of 25 years. That is the cost to the taxpayer. That is pure wealth transfer from the consumers to this. But now they've come to power and then they're not opposing it anymore because it's a coalition government and then Narendra Modi calls the shots. So we are seeing this across every sector. And when the socialists point this out, they don't have a point. And it's only the libertarians who actually have a solution to this. Because everybody is just talking about privatization, not a proper way to do private. We are all about property rights. We don't want the government to create monopolies. For example, when you have an airport in many cities, the airport developer basically has signs up a monopoly agreement with the government saying that no new airport can come in within a distance of like I don't know 200 kilometers or something without a prior permission. So even though the airport might be private, it is a sort of a quasi monopoly. And when you have any sort of a government granted or a government privileged monopoly, it always ends up extracting money from you. So they can charge whatever user charges they want, they can hike up any fees they want. And as libertarians, you might be willing to, you might be tempted to say that, well, it's a private company, they can charge what they want, but they are basically depending on a government granted monopoly. So we as libertarians, we oppose most of these government granted monopolies. We want free market. We want anybody to be able to build another airport without having to, I mean, take the required, make sure the required norms of safety are met, but you don't want to have your competitor agree to it, right? So this is artificially keeping costs high and we are all paying out of our pocket. So when you land at a private airport that is in a monopoly, you end up paying more, the services might be bad, and pretty much they will not really care. So that's what's happening. And so the rules are also tightened or relaxed based on which group to favor and how to do it. So if you look at the Tata Group, so Tata Group been there for a very long time, and even if you look across their groups, sometimes they're asking for import tariffs. So the steel industry is always demanding additional tariffs on steel because they're saying, we have to protect the domestic interests. And then it was funny when Ratan Tata was opposing that we had that in the airlines we had the 520 rule, and when Tata wanted to do international flights, he said this is unfair, this is monopoly, this is competition. And Tata Motors, I mean, when he was still alive, I think in 2016, 2017, he was saying, you know what, we need to get rid of import taxes on automobiles and automobile parts because that is the reason why the Indian automobile sector hasn't really grown. We are not competitive. We are not able to compete in the export industry. So fair point, but somehow that only happened because he, after acquiring Jaguar Land Rover, and he gained a lot of expertise. He wanted to bring in stuff from outside. So when it suited him, it was fine. And then just last year, Tata Motors is now again asking for import duties on vehicles because they are worried about EVs coming in, companies like Tesla and all. So these companies and groups are always pro tariff or against tariff, not based on any economic self interest. And government policies absolutely reflect that, and that is creating a whole lot of problems. So yes, the rich are getting richer, more richer than they should be in a free market, and that should be a serious problem for all libertarians. And this is happening at the expense of the common man. The poor. When you are building a house, imagine the amount of steel that goes into it. Now, if you're able to get cheaper steel from abroad, but not able to use it because the government wants to protect the private steel companies. So every penny of profit that unproductive, inefficient domestic steel company makes in profits is actually coming from the pockets of all of us who are actually using any other steel-based product. Could be even building a house or even the automobile industry. If their cost of raw material goes up, we are all paying for it. And I think this is something that we need to bring into the mass awareness because people don't really realize how much that they're being extorted and looted and how much of wealth transfer is actually happening in this process. I'll just pull up some data. So family-owned businesses in India today, the five top groups control 18% of all non-financial corporate assets, and these are like book value assets. So we're not talking about stock market valuation. So these are actual assets. This is about 18%, and this is up from 10% in 91. So in 91, the top groups controlled about 10%. Today, it's 18%, and that's an incredible amount of growth in the wealth. Just fine. This happens in all the countries, but you look at the income. Okay, so that's the very important thing that's happening. If you look at it in the income in the last 15 years, growth in income for these groups has actually flatlined. Okay, so the market value is growing, asset value is growing, but income's not growing. So what does that tell us? So normally, if you are investing more and more money, you need to see return on your capital or your return on your investment. So here it means that they're underperforming. They're just using government to capture assets, capture wealth, but these are not really these productive industries. And if you look at it in comparison with US, in US, the top 1% of firms, I mean, again, I'm not just saying top 4 or 5, the top 1% control 97% of the total corporate assets. And they generate 85% of the revenues and profits. And look at which are the sectors in US that actually generate a lot of money. You will find a lot of them in tech. You'll find a lot of them in retail, consumer. In India, if you look at which are the top ones, these are like ports, power, coal, steel, cement, telecom. All of them are highly regulated. So the richest companies, the biggest corporations, most of the family companies are all making money in these industries, which are so highly competitive, not competitive, but highly controlled by the government. So this is basically just government privileges that these are benefiting, that they are benefiting from. So these a free economy is one where capital will flow to those who generate value. But India is not going to those who are generating value. It is just going to people who are in close proximity to people of power. And that is absolutely using. And this is goes against the whole concept of merit. Right? So when you have any businessman who comes up with an idea and he is not able to do it, you harass them with GST, you harass them with a lot of regulations, and then suddenly it's like you roll out the red carpet to all these big firms. So if you're a small software company, right, and you want to go set up an office somewhere, does the government give you anything? Nothing, right? Like you set up a 100-seater software company, they're not giving you anything. But some of the larger companies go, government gives acres and acres of land, software parks, all infrastructure, at a so this is the problem of others. It's not a level playing field. But as libertarians, I think we should definitely evaluate it. For something, somebody from the top is going to call them from the PM's office, CM's office, whoever. That's what happens. So I mean, it's not sorry, or even there is a way to take advantage using the government, and they're just going for it. So what do we do about this? One, we need to fight for government. A lot of times, portions of land gives it to the company mostly at subsidized cost. So we need stronger property right protections, and also government when uh, idea. I mean, they've done well in China, and there's been a lot of economic progress. But even the concept of SEC is problematic because you're privileging only those companies who can actually have access to the SEC. So it's not like a small business. There are people, small units that do exports, probably might be set up somewhere in Bombay, somewhere elsewhere. But gaining access to SEC is not easy. And for example, in the case of the Mundra SEC, the port is so tightly coupled with the SEC. So you are again the government spent a lot of money acquiring land. A lot of state-backed infrastructure was used funded, and then again, it benefits them, and you don't have the sort of freedom of choice that you would have if you have policies like instead of creating SEZ. Ideally, you want to make it easy for everyone to export. Maybe somebody has like, some and small unit somewhere in Bombay, Karnataka, or some rural place. Why are you making it so hard for them to export things? Like, those sort of barriers should be removed. They're just like only building SEVs or building some sort of a gift city. You want to make life easy for everybody. It should not be a sort of a privilege that the government can dispense to those who are well off. And even the regulatory burden for a small business to actually engage with the GST compliance is pretty high. But the larger the company is, they can afford, no matter how complicated your rules are, they have like a full-fledged team to handle it. So the more complicated the regulatory regime is, the more it disadvantages the poor. So finally, yeah, the 91 story is incomplete. It was just a very small beginning. We need something that is 10 times that. We have already lost a couple decades of economic progress. A lot of us thought that, in 2014, we would be moving more and more towards a more freer economy and freer country. That has not happened. Labor law reforms have not happened. It is still ridiculously difficult. And the whole divergence between the service industry and the industrial sector is largely because it is so difficult to do manufacturing in India. So the 91 story was good, but it doesn't even, I mean, it's barely anything scheme of things or scheme of unleashing the sort of potential that our country has. So we should fight harder for it. And I hope all of you guys will support us in whatever we are trying to do to, appeal to the government or, try to give some pushback when these sort of policies are hurting the country. So yeah, I'm very happy to see all of you guys here, and I hope that we can have a lot of contribution from you because this is something has to come from the people. Right now, whenever a corporate wants a favorable tax policy, they go and lobby for it. So the thousands, the millions of people who are impacted by high steel prices are not going to go and stage a protest in front of the parliament or the front of the state government. But those companies can actually go and lobby for it. And this can only change when there is a lot more greater awareness and we also form these sort of lobbying groups or groups which will go protest or oppose the government very loudly. We have to be very vocal about voicing our opinion. We have to do it in a way which is very visible. The government has to see it. And a lot of times we joke saying that we can't just go onto the streets and do it. But you have to actually do it because that is when the government knows. Like you can have like 1 million people on Twitter tweeting about it, but it really won't matter unless they can see it in person. So you go block the government office with 500 people, and the sort of impact that it will have is incredible. I mean, pretty soon you have 1,000 people. The New York Times will say it's like 1 million people. You see now they've written about the farmers protest. So we need to be able to do something like that. Use AI like how Trump has done and fill up the numbers, do something. But we have to make this. We have to make this bigger. We have to be much more louder, and hopefully all of you will contribute to that cause. And yeah, that's all. That's what I have to say. Mhm. Okay.
Whether you have any questions, Ajay?
Yeah. Yeah, guys. Somebody give him a mic. Yeah. My advocates of free. So as advocates of free markets, we often end up siding with the rich and contribute to which actually, for example, minimum wage for welfare state. Going towards it only like and, uh, when those things we are powerless. So what happens is that we just like kind of supporting policies that the rich people want. Okay, good question. One, I want to, you spoke about two things. One is the welfare and the other is the minimum wages. One, I want to say that the minimum wages don't really help the poor. I mean, you might think that a minimum wage actually helps the poor, but it discriminates against the poorest within the poor. Okay, so what happens is the market wages are based on supply and demand. So, for example, if you say that I'm going to pay, like, 300 or 500 rupee. No, it's just not about unemployment, right? So, for example, see, you have a company and the government says the minimum wage has to be 1,000 rupees a day, for example. Your, your employment will still get filled. It is not a question of unemployment, but it is who is getting filled for those jobs. Now, there might be somebody who is less skilled than the person who's getting the job. And the only way for him to get a job is go to the company and say, you know what, I will work for less. Because and he probably needs the money more. And now that guy will not get a job. As Ashley had said, we always have to look at the unseen effects of economic policies. The minimum wage, one, it is discriminating between the classes of poor. The people who are more desperate for the job are the ones who are not getting it. If you actually look at it even in cities, why is it that most of them are actually run by immigrant population from whether from across the country or the other people? Those people are more desperate for jobs. Why do people from states like Bihar and you go all the way to other states to work? And in every state, you will find a lot of people who are unemployed but will not go to a construction site and work. Why do you think that is happening? This is happening because those people need the job more. That money, what that company is paying, let's say, for example, in Bombay, if a construction company is paying an X wage, those people value that amount more than the other people. So when you have a minimum wage, you are actually discriminating against the person who needs the job the most. And in many sectors, sometimes that is the way for them to also gain some sort of an experience and get foothold into an industry. Right? So a minimum wage is absolutely incorrect that the minimum wage helps the poor. Wages should be market determined. There should be no such thing as a minimum wage. And in fact, a lot of people think that if the government doesn't have a minimum wage, suddenly if the wages will just drop down, which isn't true. You know how difficult it is actually to find labor in a country like Bombay, right? Just like go around to any of these restaurants and ask them how hard it is to find somebody as a dishwasher, a guy to wash dishes. Unskilled labor, right? Literally do this right. Anybody can do it. It is so difficult for them to find. In fact, that is one of the roles which is so hard to fill. And these people will be paying, I don't know how Bombay, but nothing less than 15,000 rupees, and they'll provide you a staff room and food and will not find anybody to do dishes. And all of them again depend on immigrant labor. So why is that happening? Because maybe the locals are sort of satisfied. They have a house, they have the comfort level, they're not hungry enough to go and work for that, or maybe they don't like the work. So minimum wage is absolutely not a good idea. And the other thing about welfare is, you have to, okay, granted, the things are really messed up. So it's not that tomorrow you can just wake up one morning and say, let all the welfare vanish overnight. A lot of things have been messed up, and, people have been handicapped, and, they've been, but it has to be phased out eventually. I mean, there is no alternate to it because you are extracting money from the productive class and encouraging sort of, and in fact, like going to the point that I said before, a lot of locals, because they also get a lot of welfare schemes and subsidies, also don't want to work because there'll be some scheme that they will get in, and therefore the amount of money that they require to actually go and work on a job goes up. You are actually pushing up the market wages there. And as far as steel subsidies and all, yes, libertarians are absolutely opposed to it. And a lot of these policies, right? High taxation on fuel. For example, if you have close to 50% of the money that you pay on fuel goes to taxes, right? So that is applicable for everybody. For a rich guy, it probably doesn't matter as much as it does to a poor guy. So we are actually opposed to a lot of these policies. If you look at it, the libertarian perspective on economic issues is very helpful. It's more helpful for the middle class and and the people who are actually paying a very high amount of money and not getting anything in return. And a lot of big corporations actually lose under libertarian policies because they actually have to compete in the free market. They have to compete internationally. They have to compete within themselves. They have to compete for labor. Right now, the state's giving them sort of a monopoly status. So freer markets, property rights will actually enrich our society and make things much better. Yeah. Unless you can no, I mean, if you just leave the empirical part of it aside, purely on principle, right? It's a very simple principle that somebody who needs the job more is just discriminated from the market. All right, everyone. We'll take a break now for lunch, and then
All the questions will be answered.
yeah, we'll just come back for the Q&A session afterwards.
Just a quick thing to everybody who's on our live stream. We know you guys have supported us a lot. You have subscribed. We know you retweet. We know you like our posts. We know you have, been there for us, and that's been a big inspiration. We are now going to sort of break for lunch, and we will be back roughly within an hour for the afternoon session. So do stay tuned. And if you're watching the live stream and you haven't subscribed to our channels, please do hit the subscribe button somewhere here, wherever it is. Hit the subscribe button, and we should be able to, uh, communicate better later. And thank you all for your support. We'll meet back roughly in about an hour. Thank you. Sure.